My disagreements with John McCain over the years notwithstanding, he was an American hero, an American patriot, served the public for 60 years, 60 of his 81 years. But to some of the news media, the most important part of his life was his last 3 years when he feuded with Donald Trump. I wonder why they're doing that. And there was little love lost, we know that, between Trump and the late senator. But a simple question, is now the time to constantly invoke a political feud? Joining me with their takes, Ari Fleischer, former White House press secretary for President George W. Bush, Monica Crowley from the London Center for Policy Research, and Juan Williams, co-host of The Five. Juan, what do you see happening here? There's been a kind of a nonstop series of complaints about how President Trump first tweeted about it. The statement wasn't long enough. The way the flag was lowered and then should have stayed lowered. Then it was lowered again. And to me, it seems like a lot of this is getting away from John McCain, the man, and back to criticizing Trump, the president. Your reaction?
Well, I agree. I think that you have to honor John McCain, the man, especially now, as we go into this season of grieving and pay our respects to him and to his family. He truly was an American patriot, I think almost the definition in our generation, Laura. But I disagree with you about the media. I don't think the media is the one that refused to issue the statement at the recommendation of the chief of staff, the press secretary. I don't think it's the press that lowered the flag just temporarily and put it back up today before then changing course. I don't think it's the press that's been out there taking shots at John McCain. I think that's Donald Trump.
Well, you know, the current code for lowering the flag, it's been a tradition that it's lowered for the day of and the day after the passing of a member of Congress. In some recent years, it's lasted for several days. But it's not like Trump did something that's completely out of the ordinary. I mean, I probably would have just kept it lowered for till he was, you know, actually buried. That's fine.
The American Legion said the same thing.
That's fine. But again, to turn this, Ari Fleischer, into, well, McCain was this type of man, and Donald Trump is this other type of man, immoral, without a great sense of patriotism, as he was not bipartisan, et cetera, et cetera. You get the sense that these political types are salivating over the opportunity to use a death to hit Trump. Am I misreading this?
No, Laura, you nailed it. And let me just stipulate, John McCain and Donald Trump did not get along. And that's the way two grown-up politicians can act toward each other. John McCain didn't want Donald Trump to come to his funeral. Donald Trump can return the favor by being dismissive if he wants. But the press, as they cover this, is very situational. They cover you depending on what situation you find yourself in. So in 2000, they loved John McCain because he was running against George Bush. In 2008, when John McCain ran against Barack Obama, they didn't really love him anymore. They loved him when he took positions against Republicans after he lost the presidential race, and then they didn't love him anymore when he was for the surge. Now, of course, that he's in a spat with Donald Trump, they love him again. This is how the press covers these things, and it's really just to stir a pot. It's not to shine an eternal light on the truth.
Monica, I remember back in 2010 when John McCain was running for re-election to the Senate. He ran this campaign commercial about how we need to repair that dang fence. Remember, he got a huge amount of blowback from the media saying, whoa, where's the other John McCain? So again, back to Ari's point, the media took shot after shot after shot at McCain when he was McCain, the conservative, standing up for, you know, the pro-life movement, or in this case, building the fence or the border structure. But now that McCain is the opponent of Trump, they use that as a convenient vehicle just days before his burial.
Yeah, you know, the press has always been shameless, but in situations like this, you see it put in bold relief. I remember in the run-up to the 2008 election, I remember Democratic friends of mine in New York and elsewhere saying, oh, John McCain, you know, he's a moderate, he's a centrist, he's the kind of Republican that I can get with. And then after the election, I said, well, did you vote for him? Well, of course not. And when it comes to the media, and you know, this is the same media, so many of them, that professed to love the Maverick until he won the Republican nomination for president. Then they began to smear him with all kinds of abominable lies and attacks. So this is who they are, and we know that. I just hope, you know, John McCain has a special place in my heart because I worked for President Nixon during the last years of his life. Nixon was the commander-in-chief that brought John McCain home after he was released. President Nixon had many wonderful things to say about Senator McCain and had enormous respect for him. I think we all share in that. I just hope that in the next days leading up to his funeral, that we don't go down the path of what happened with Paul Wellstone, who was a Democrat who died in office, who's U.S. Senator, very far left guy, and his funeral was turned into this partisan jamboree. I think in death we ought to eulogize these people, honor their service to the country even when we disagree with them, but respect their memory.
Yeah. Well, I think, Juan, Mark Short said today, we don't have to play this soundbite, but he basically said, look, if Trump had been very sentimental toward McCain, they would have ridiculed Trump, saying, you guys didn't get along. Like, you're faking it now. You said this thing about a captured POW. Now you're trying to, lionize McCain, basically saying he's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. Is there some of that going on with every move that Donald Trump makes? He just simply cannot win with this media.
Well, I don't think so. But, I mean, in fact, I think people try to make sure in the media that they are not in position to be criticized by Laura Ingraham. They go out of their way. To me, you got to go back to the idea that Trump, insulted the guy in a very critical moment and, in a way that says, you're not a hero because you got caught. And that just offended a lot of people, but it didn't stop Donald Trump from winning the nomination.
Right?
That's why I was going to say that to you. So, yeah. I mean, Republicans made a decision there. So I think that, ultimately this is about Donald Trump's behavior to a rival, and I just don't think it's admirable. I do not.
No. Well, no. Ari, I'll let you close it out. McCain, remember back in 2004, he joked about, like, he'd be number 2 to John Kerry on the ticket. Remember that? And Republicans went crazy. He was kind of joking. But the media loves it when a Republican praising Obama, praising Clinton. They love that. But when a Republican is a hardline conservative on issue or after issue, that's when they unload. So McCain is, obviously in death, a war hero, is getting an amazing send-off, and I think that's fantastic. But Trump's not going to be a phony here. He's not going to pretend that he and McCain were buddy-buddy. They weren't. Trump was tough on him, and I wouldn't have said what he said about the POW thing. But you got to say both of them were kind of honest in the end.
And the other part of this that just bothers me when you talk about the press coverage is, don't forget, in 2008, there were reporters at the Huffington Post, columnists, who wrote that McCain was a racist. And we heard that throughout the 2008 campaign. But, this is not about Donald Trump. As much as I think that the flag should have been at half-mast, let the two have their feud. It's going to the grave now. But this is not about Donald Trump. This is about John McCain's life. And that's who we should be talking about. That's what the media should be focused on. And I really don't think this is going to move Americans if Donald Trump doesn't behave the way you want him to.
All right.
About John McCain, this is about John McCain's life, not Donald Trump's.
An amazing life, an amazing American patriotic experience. Thank you all for joining us tonight. But what happens, by the way, to a celebrity who refuses publicly to trash Trump? Tiger Woods is finding out the hard way.
Shoot the cuffs. No. Commit to it. Shoot them. Bam. You see the bookends right there? It shows you you're big time, baby.
You want to move weight? You come to me.
You feeling it?
Yeah, I'm feeling it.
Would you believe a 15-year-old kid was working for the federal government?
But he was.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm asleep almost immediately. I stay asleep at night and I wake up more well-rested in the morning.
That's why I invented MyPillow. My patented fill adjusts to your exact individual needs and helps keep your neck supported and aligned.
Call or go to MyPillow.com. Use the promo code and save over 50% with Mike's 4-pack. You'll get 2 MyPillow Premiums and 2 Go Anywhere pillows. It's one of his best offers ever. Order now.
With our 60-day money-back guarantee, you have nothing to lose. Sleep well, America!
For the best night's sleep in the whole wide world, visit MyPillow.com.
You love your mom and dad, and they've always been there for you, always taken care of you. But now they could use a hand, and sometimes more help than you can provide. Thankfully, there's Senior Helpers, experts in Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's care. We can help you transition from a hospital stay to home, or just help your loved one with assistance with their everyday needs. Visit seniorhelpers.com to learn more. Discover why Senior Helpers is senior care, only better.
Are you looking for vacation rentals? Search Home to Go Florida from $49, Home to Go California from $52, Home to Go New York, $59. Home to Go, the world's largest vacation rental search engine.
Home to go.
Men, after 40, you have a choice. Live with less drive and less muscle, or get Ageless Male, the best-selling free testosterone booster with over 4 million bottles sold. Ageless Male. Promote confidence, libido, and more free testosterone.
Tiger Woods is under fire for this exchange with a reporter during a tournament yesterday.
I think a lot of people, especially people of color, immigrants, feel threatened by him, by his policies. He's thrown himself into sports debates in terms of race with LeBron James, with the anthem. What do you say to people who might find it interesting that you have, I guess, a friendly relationship with him?
Well, he's the president of the United States, and you have to respect the office. And no matter who's in the office, you may like, dislike personality or the politics, but we all must respect the office.
So controversial. Well, the president tweeted his thanks to Tiger today for not taking the media's bait. But the storm looks far from over for Woods. Joining us now, Jason Whitlock, co-host of Speak for Yourself on Fox Sports 1. Jason, what do we think here? What's happening? Tiger Woods has been friends with the president for some time. They play golf together every now and then. But you might as well put him up on a cross because he actually wouldn't trash the president yesterday.
Look, for a number of years, Donald Trump was popular with all sorts of celebrities, black, white, liberal, conservative, whatever. And there are a group of them, from Tom Brady to Tiger Woods to Bill Belichick, to Kanye West, who will not renounce Trump. And I don't blame them. I think that the media is trying to force a narrative that if you're black, you have to hate Donald Trump because he somehow went from 30 years being very popular in black culture, being very popular with rappers and all kinds of celebrities, and then he became the president and he became the most racist man on the planet Earth. And some people just aren't going for that who know Donald Trump, like a Tiger Woods, like a Kanye West, like a Tom Brady, and I don't blame them for standing firm.
Hey, Jason, I want you to react to something that happened today. A couple of people you know well on ESPN's First Take. Let's watch.
We must respect the office, therefore that confers respect to the occupant. Tiger, is that what you're saying? If that's what you're saying, that is a stupid comment. I don't even know if he believes that that's what he's saying.
First of all, we don't know what Tiger Woods believes. He's Camblinasian. He's not black. When he got arrested, he was black.
I don't know what Camblination is. I must be really out of it.
Well, I think that's how Tiger defined himself. Listen, okay. But here's where I'll disagree, and I know Stephen A. I'm friends with Max Kellerman, have known them both for a long time. Look, where Stephen A. is saying he's not black because when he was arrested, they listed him as black. Tiger Woods, like every human being, gets to define himself. Other people don't get to define Tiger Woods. So I reject that by Stephen A. Smith. And as far as Max Kellerman goes, look, man, if Tiger Woods respects Donald Trump, they have a long-established relationship and friendship. If Tiger Woods was raised by a military father and a Thai mother who taught him to have the ultimate respect for authority, for the country, Tiger Woods just doesn't buy Max Kellerman's narrative, and he has a right to do that. He's an American. He's free to think what Tiger Woods thinks and what he was raised to believe, not what Max Kellerman and other liberals who I guess just want black people to dance to whatever music they play. They can't dance to their own music. And again, I'm friends with Max Kellerman. I get it. But some of these white liberals just want black people to dance to whatever song they're playing, and some people just don't want to do that.
Well, to me, it's beyond outrageous and shocking to tell other people what they should think about their own friendships. I mean, what happened to people being able to decide who they want to be friends with? I guess that's not allowed anymore in liberal
Laura,
la la
I
land.
take a lot of heat for saying this, but listen, we in this country have bought into this narrative that if you're liberal, you're free of racism. And if you just paint yourself in that liberal brush, no one can question anything. If you look at the behavior, and again, I know Max Kellerman, I don't think he's a racist, but is he behaving in a racist fashion when he's telling Tiger Woods he can only think this way? Who's dictating the mindset to Tiger Woods and other free people how they have to think? That's a day. I wish I was that smart to tell myself what to think and others.
All right, Jason, great to talk to you. Come on radio soon. Great to have you on tonight. And coming up, shocking allegations of sexual abuse, a cover-up that includes Pope Francis. Raymond Arroyo has the latest next.
Listen to me. Where's the attack?
9/11 cost $500,000. What do you think they can do with 20 times that amount of money?
Dr. Ryan, you found him. What do you want to do?
We have to chase this down.
I'm only human after all. Don't put the blame on me.
Keeping faith in the president? After the Cohen bombshell, are evangelicals still supporting Trump? Pastor Robert Jeffress breaks it down with Shannon. Next, Fox News at Night.
With so many mattresses out there, how do you know which one is really the best? Just look at how the Purple Smart Comfort Grid, made from a super comfy yet ultra supportive material called hyperelastic polymer, cradled those unfertilized chickies.
Purple's unique design cradles your pressure points and redistributes support to the rest of your body for maximum comfort and support.
For a limited time, buy any Purple mattress and get a free Purple pillow.
Are you over 50? Would you like to get up to 33% more income in retirement? Then call now for this free book, Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers, from a leading financial firm on maximizing your income in retirement. That's right, free. This free book reveals little-known secrets about annuity strategies in simple-to-understand terms that will help you make the right choices before buying an annuity. And it's free. Call right now for your free book, and as a bonus, we'll also throw in a free annuity rate report. We researched over 1,200 annuities and summarized the rates and benefits of annuities from financially strong insurers. Again, that's Annuity Do's and Don'ts for Baby Boomers and a free annuity rate report, both absolutely free, for calling Annuity General today. Supplies are limited. Call now.
Call 800-774-3956. That's 800-774-3956.
I don't want these northern boats coming down and giving us a run for our money.
This is what we wanted, baby. We can't let them boys beat us in our backyard.
Wicked Tuna Outer Banks. New episodes Sundays at 9 on National Geographic.
Catholic Church is in a state of upheaval tonight. A newly released letter by a former Vatican ambassador to the U.S., Carlo Vigano, claims that Pope Francis and other top officials of the Church knew of the allegations of sexual abuse against Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, the Archbishop of Washington, and they knew it for years. What's the real story here? For more, we're joined by Raymond Arroyo, managing editor of EWTN News, who's covered the Vatican for decades, and a Fox News contributor. Raymond, who are these? Who is the main whistleblower?
Well, Archbishop Vigano, who you mentioned earlier, he was the nuncio, the ambassador to the U.S. for the Vatican here for about 5 years. He also ran all of the embassies around the world for the Vatican.
Well respected.
Before. Very well respected, man of integrity, a sharpshooter, and a man who has been a whistleblower in the past. In 2011, he wrote secret letters to Pope Benedict at the time, outing corruption in the Vatican. Those were leaked and became the Vatileaks scandal. It was his exposés, meant only for the Pope's eyes, that got worldwide attention.
Well, why is he releasing this letter?
Well,
he's 77 years old.
He claims he wants to unveil his conscience. He can't go go to his death with the information he has, and he sees the corruption and the double dealing in the Vatican. He's exposing it. His allegation, the principal one, is that between 2009 and 2010, Pope Benedict imposed a penalty on Archbishop McCarrick because he knew they had paid settlements to men that he had abused. He also took him out of public ministry. Now, when Pope Francis became Pope, Vigano claims he informed the Pope himself of McCarrick's misdeeds, and the Pope ignored this and restored McCarrick. That's the charge.
That's the allegation, and some others are vouching for Vigano's credibility.
Well, we should put up the full screen. I want people to see this. This is a full screen from the letter of Vigano. Watch this. It says, Francis knew from at least June of 2013 that McCarrick was a serial predator.
What?
In an extremely dramatic moment for the Universal Church, he must acknowledge his mistakes, and in keeping with the proclaimed principle of zero tolerance, Pope Francis must be the first to set a good example for cardinals and bishops who covered up for McCarrick's abuses and resign along with all of them. He's calling for the Pope's resignation and for all of these people.
This is exploding all around the world.
It's
this
huge.
is coming on that big family meeting in Ireland, which was not well attended, by the way. Here's the Pope reacting to the news on a plane returning from that family conference in Ireland.
I read it, and I will say sincerely that I must say this to you and all of you who are interested. Read the document carefully and judge it for yourselves. I will not say one word on this. I think the statement speaks for itself.
Well, many Catholics are saying it speaks for itself, and they feel the Pope should have done some disclaimer, said something. It looks like an evasive answer and makes the Pope look bad. In the meantime, bishops around the United States and the world, Tyler, Texas, Arizona, and the entire Conference of Catholic Bishops say these are credible charges that need full investigation. They're demanding that from Pope Francis.
Could this lead to the ouster of a pope? That's never happened
Well,
before.
we'll see. Look, there's no mechanism to do that.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see. We'll continue on this.
All right. Fantastic, Raymond. Thanks so much. We'll be right back.
Hi. I have questions for you. You're not busy, are you?
Ooh, Barracuda.
Just saw her family get murdered. And the guys who did it walked.
She's back. Remember me? Drug dealers, corrupt judges. I will kill every one of you. And then I'll pretty much wing it from there.
Ooh, Barracuda.
Peppermint. Rated R, September 7th.
I was up and down with my weight my entire life. I realized I wasn't enjoying life as much as I could.
From a top diet 8 years straight comes all new Rapid Results by Jenny Craig. Lose up to 16 pounds in just 4 weeks.
If you see immediate results, you stick with it.
With Rapid Results, you can boost your energy, improve your mood, and get better sleep.
We're just trying to help you be your healthiest, best self and to enjoy your life.
Your dedicated consultant will give you one-on-one support.
The moment I asked for help, it was easier.
The secret is what you eat and when, with delicious chef-crafted food. No prepping or cooking necessary.
You know, I didn't have to spend hours in the kitchen. We didn't have to spend hours at the supermarket.
Rapid Results uses innovative science to work naturally with your metabolism.
It's not this appearance or this dress size. It's getting to the best version of yourself.
Start Rapid Results to lose 16 pounds for $16 plus the cost of food and get $120 in free food.
Do you have a life insurance policy you no longer need or can't afford? Now you can sell your policy for an immediate payment.
We bought life insurance when our kids were young to protect their future.
Our young has just turned 40, and we no longer needed the coverage.
That got us to thinking about letting our policy go. So I did some research and called Coventry Direct. I learned that you could sell all or part of a life insurance policy, even a term life policy. Turns out, people have been selling policies like ours for the past 15 years. Who knew? We sold our policy. Now we have money to help with the medical bills.
And to add to our retirement.
If you have $100,000 or more of life insurance, you may be a candidate to sell your policy. Call 1-800-471-6800 or visit CoventryDirect.com for a free information packet. 1-800-471-6800. Coventry Direct. Redefining insurance.
Before we go tonight, this is so choice. I love it. Lanny Davis says he was the source for CNN's Trump Tower story, in that he regrets it, and he regrets his denial of his own involvement. Oh, my God. What else would a former lawyer for the Clintons do? Sorry, but prevaricate, misrepresent. We'll be on that tomorrow night, and I'll see you on the radio tomorrow. We love hearing your thoughts. Follow me on Twitter. Shannon Bream and the Fox News at Night team coming up next, I'm sure, on this story and a lot more. Shannon.
Yeah, we're definitely going to hit that one, but welcome back, Laura. Great to have you back in the family.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Laura. We begin tonight with a Fox News alert. A top Canadian official is cutting her European trips short, heading here to Washington as early as tomorrow. As the president says NAFTA is out, the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement is in. A live report in just minutes, and then Senator John Thune is here to weigh in. Plus, in honor of Senator John McCain's life, President Trump orders flags at half staff after flags at the White House started the day at full staff. Tonight, the president makes his first public comments on McCain's passing. We've got those for you. Those comments came, by the way, at a huge state-like dinner for evangelical leaders. Pastor Robert Jeffress was there. He will join us live tonight with the Inside Scoop. Hello and welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream in Washington. We begin tonight with the life and legacy of Arizona Senator John McCain. Today, senators from both sides of the aisle are honoring one of their own. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is tracking all the reaction. She's got the latest. Kristen.
Well, Shannon, Senator McCain will be back inside the building that he loved so much, the U.S. Capitol, on Friday. He'll become the 31st person to ever lie in state in the Capitol's rotunda. It's one of the greatest honors available to an American statesman, but his colleagues in the Senate, they couldn't wait until then to begin the process of finding the words to explain what he meant to them and what he meant to his country.
Bring solace to the multitudes who mourn his death.
As the Senate convened for the first time since Senator John McCain's death, his colleagues on both sides of the aisle paid tribute to a senator known as the Maverick for his devotion to the core American principles as he saw them over party politics.
The Senate won't be the same without